If you want to write stories your readers will love, there are 3 things you need to do. Understand storytelling principles, see how other writers have applied those principles, and then use them in your own work. Here on the Story Nerd podcast, our goal is to demystify story theory. We'll help you with the first 2 steps so that you can get started with the third. I'm Melanie Hill, writer, editor, and poet, and I help writers identify and solve their story problems.
And I'm Valerie Francis. I'm a writer and a story editor, and I teach women who are writing in all genres how stories work so they can finish their books faster and without frustration.
On today's episode, Valerie pitched Backdraft so that we can study the hero's monologue. This 1991 film was directed by Ron Howard from a screenplay by Ron Whiddon. Now, of course, there will be spoilers because we can't talk about the movie without talking about the movie. And please help other writers find our show by leaving a rating and review. For Apple Podcast listeners, you can do it right from your phone. Simply go to the show's landing page and scroll to the bottom. It's that simple. All right, Valerie, this should be a pretty straightforward episode for the hero's monologue. How did you go?
I think you're right. I think it will be pretty straightforward. So last season I did the villain's monologue. So I thought it was only right for me to look at the hero's monologue this season. So like the villain's monologue, the hero's monologue is purely exposition, and its function in a story is to explain to the audience or the reader why the hero does what she does. Now, even though it's called the hero's monologue, it applies to all protagonists, no matter which kind of protagonist they are. In past episodes, you might recall, I explained that there are actually 4 types of protagonists. And Melanie, maybe in an upcoming season, I'll do a deep dive into the 4 types of protagonists. That might be a good topic to cover. For now, though, just understand that this is the main character's monologue. Also, like the villain's monologue, the hero's monologue doesn't actually have to be delivered by the hero, and it doesn't actually have to be a monologue. However, and this is important, if you decide to give another character the monologue, or if you decide to deliver it through another medium, you really have to know what you're doing. This has got to be a very strategic choice that is in service of the story, that actually makes the story better. Here's why. The hero is the star of the story, right? The main character is the star of the story. It is the most important aspect of any story. All stories exist in a hierarchy. Character is above plot, even in plot-driven stories. And within character, the protagonist reigns supreme. Right at the top of the hierarchy is the main character. And that's true for novels, and it's true for films and TV shows. Whatever kind of story you're writing, that is true. That means that the monologue is huge. It's a really big deal. If the hero is the star of the show, the star demands a monologue. To give it to another character diminishes the star. And when I say star, it could, if this is a Hollywood film, be a celebrity star, right? It could be a George Clooney or a Sandra Bullock, or it could be a big name and literally a star. Even if it's an indie film, the protagonist is still the star, small s, star of the story. And therefore, you gotta keep your audiences or your readers' attention focused on that character. This monologue, this explaining why the character is behaving the way she is so important that if you give it to somebody else or deliver it in some way other than words out of the main character's mouth, boy, you got to have a really good reason, like a really, really good reason. I'm not saying it can't be done. I'm just saying be really careful about it. This is who the story is about, right? Like your whole story is about this main character. If the reader's attention starts to wander away from the main character, you are losing the thread of your story. it means that a secondary character is likely going to steal the story. And that is dangerous business. That is really dangerous business. All right. So let's look now at Backdraft and see how the hero's monologue applies. Or maybe it doesn't apply. We'll see. Okay. So for starters, we've got two characters to consider. The protagonist, the main protagonist, is Brian, and that's played by William Baldwin. However, this is Hollywood. And so in this case, the supporting actor is typically considered the star of the film. Stephen, Brian's brother, is played by Kurt Russell. He is given top billing. It's his picture that is featured in the art. If you look at the movie poster, William Baldwin's face isn't even all in it. Like his face is partially cut off. And I mean, I haven't seen the call sheet, but I'm pretty sure Kurt Russell was number one on that call sheet. You know, that's Hollywood politics. That's effective negotiations by Russell's agents. That's finance. Like the filmmakers know that Kurt Russell is going to bring an audience into the theaters. Right. That's what they need. Like there is no universe in which William Baldwin gets top billing over Kurt Russell. It just is not going to happen. All right. Now, if we strip all of that Hollywood and personalities, and like if we move all of that aside, right? Because that's, as the writer, that is none of our business. And if we just look at this as a story from a craft perspective, we have to acknowledge that Brian is in fact the main character and Stephen is the secondary main character, right? There's a primary main character and secondary main character. It's being marketed. Backdraft is being marketed as a story about two brothers, and it is for sure. But like I said, everything in story has a hierarchy. And so from a writer's perspective, even in a two-hander like this one of the characters takes precedence or priority over the other one. Now, it wouldn't surprise me one bit to learn that the writer had in his head that this is a story about a younger brother discovering whether he's made of the same stuff as his father and his older brother, right? Brian is the character with the arc here. Stephen doesn't have an arc. He is a constant character. So we expect, or we assume, that Brian is going to be the character with the hero's monologue. And yes, he does. But Stephen also gets a hero's monologue because, like I said, this is Kurt Russell we're talking about here. And there is not a filmmaker in Hollywood then or now who is going to rob a true star like Kurt Russell of a monologue. It's just not going to happen, right? Like if it wasn't in the script in the first place, it got added to the script when Kurt Russell got attached to it. I'm telling you that right now. All right. So if you're not writing a screenplay, if you're writing a novel, pay attention to this because there's a little caveat here. If you're writing in first person, the monologue can also be delivered via narration. Because, in a sense, in a first person novel, like the entire book is one big monologue, right? In a way, insofar as it's the character telling his or her own story. Hopefully that makes sense. Back to Backdraft again. So Brian's monologue comes first, and it's very early in the movie. It's at the 18-minute mark. And he says, he's talking to Stephen, and he says, "You know something? I must have told myself a million times that I didn't even want to be a damn fireman. Look, I know I quit the academy before, and I know how you must have felt. I got to do this, Stephen. I need to know." So that is why Brian has now actually made it through the academy and has taken a job as a firefighter. He needs to know if he's made of the same stuff as his brother and father. Now, it's short and it's sweet, but it does the trick. We now know that Brian has become a firefighter because he needs to know. What does he need to know? Well, they could have included that explicitly in this monologue. And yes, it would have worked. They could have done it with a couple of words. Like Brian could literally have said, "I need to know if I'm as good as you and as good as you and Dad." Right? They could have done that. So why didn't they? Well, I don't think it would have been true to his character in that point of the story. Brian knows his father was an excellent firefighter, and he knows his father was a hero. He also knows that Stephen is a hero and is an even better firefighter than their father was. Stephen knows it too. He even says that the fire won't get him because he knows more than their father did. Now, that's probably because the whole industry, generally the industry as a whole, it's had 20 more years of experience in studying fires and the behavior of fire and educating firefighters. So there's 20 more years of knowledge. So that's probably why Stephen knows more than their father did at the time. But at this point in the story, it's in the first act. It's before Brian has gone through any character arc at all. So he simply can't state out loud that he needs to know if he's as good as his brother or his father. He doesn't have it in him yet to be that vulnerable and to articulate his feelings to that extent. However, bit by bit, over the course of the movie, he does begin to explicitly acknowledge that Stephen is actually braver than him and more heroic than him and smarter than him when it comes to fighting fires. But he also suspects Stephen of being an arsonist. Now, it might only be a moment of doubt, but it's enough doubt to get him to break into Stephen's locker at the fire hall, and it's enough to get him to investigate his own brother. Okay, so that is Brian's monologue. That leaves us with Stephen. His monologue comes at exactly the halfway point in the film, right at 1 hour and 8 minutes. And there's an hour and 8 minutes left. Like, it's exactly in the middle. And just like the villain's monologue, these heroes' monologues arise at important points in the film. So in this case, it's right in the middle. Stephen has gone back to the house that he and his wife, that he used to live in with his wife and son, and his wife, they're now separated. The wife and the son still live there. And Stephen has decided to fix the roof. So Helen, who's his wife, crawls out on the roof with him and has this conversation. And it goes on for a little bit. I'll just give you the highlights here. Stephen says, "I don't care what you heard, Helen. I treated him," meaning Brian, "better than any other probie I've ever had, all right? I mean, he probably hates my guts, but at least he finally took a look in the mirror. He would have bought it, Helen. I am telling you, maybe not today, maybe not next year, but it would have happened. All right? I mean, he's my brother." So why is Stephen behaving the way he is? Because he's being kind of mean to his brother. He is giving his brother a bit of a harder time. It's because he knows his brother. Brian is a quitter. He has quit everything. Brian is not as focused as Stephen knows you need to be when you're in that situation. He knows that Brian will not follow orders, and you have to follow orders in that situation or people will die. And so Stephen doesn't want his brother to get hurt himself or to cause anyone to get hurt. And so because he knows him so well, he needles him a lot harder, and he really does force him to shape up or ship out, basically. So this is halfway, and it's right before the midpoint shift, which is in the very next scene. This is when Shadow, which is the character's name is Don Rimgale, and his nickname is Shadow. That's when he discovers the cause of the Backdraft fires. Now, I remember when I first watched this movie, I would have nightmares about fire, like forever. Now I know why I haven't watched this movie again since 1991. It's kind of scary if you're afraid of fire. This is kind of scary. So even though this conversation between Helen and Stephen is not technically the midpoint shift, it's right before it. So it's still a really important placement in the story. And it reveals that Stephen's behavior is motivated by love for his brother. It's not hatred for his brother. Okay. Basically, Stephen knows that the stakes are too high to allow Brian to, quote unquote, find himself in that job. It just, it's just not cool. So I started, Melanie, by saying that there are 4 types of protagonist. Just for the record here, Brian is an everyman protagonist, and Stephen is a hero protagonist. Brian has an arc, Stephen doesn't. He's a constant character, and there are really important reasons, story reasons, why these 2 main characters are different types of protagonists. So, yeah, maybe I will in a future season use the really do a deep dive into the 4 protagonists. I think that might be kind of fun. So stay tuned for that. Melanie, you're studying the Shadow this season, and we actually have a character called Shadow. So I'm wondering, like, how did you go with it this week?
Well, I noticed there was a character called Shadow too, but the interesting thing is I don't think he is the Shadow, but which is kind of a bit interesting. So I've actually called the character called Shadow by his proper name so that I didn't confuse everything. But I thought that this was a really interesting example of the Shadow, and I have a different point of view, Val, than you do, because I suppose I see the brothers when I look at these characters through the lens of the Shadow. I see them very differently. So I think this is going to be really fascinating. So like Valerie said, this season I'm studying the Shadow. So what is the Shadow? Well, the Shadow is all of the parts of a protagonist's personality that remain hidden. And like most character development, the characteristics of their personality are based on human behaviors. So, for example, a person who has always been happy and cheerful, who accommodates terrible behavior at work or at home, is likely to be that way when they have displayed anger in the past and they have received feedback that tells them that these feelings and actions won't result in positive outcomes for themselves. Therefore, they deny their anger and it becomes hidden and it becomes part of the Shadow. So the Shadow is the thoughts, feelings, and actions that belong to the protagonist's unconscious self. And the character traits that are received positively become the conscious part of the character, but also part of the character's identity. So if you've ever heard someone say after doing something, that's not like me, or I don't know where that came from, that is their Shadow emerging. It's the part of their personality that they try to keep hidden and try to keep it away from the surface. So the name Shadow, I think, is misleading because the personality traits that a character wants to keep hidden aren't always negative ones. And Stephen is a really good example of this, right? This is what's obvious about Stephen in the first half of the movie. He is fearless, he's stuck at lieutenant, he is brave, but his emotional capacity is limited. His wife ironically calls him the great communicator, and Stephen always needs to be right. He has a hero complex and lacks humility. So there's a lot not to like about him. And as proof of this, he's estranged from his wife and his son. He doesn't talk to his brother, and he is living in his father's old boat. And his living space is absolutely a mess. So these characteristics, though, are what works for Stephen the firefighter, and he has honed them over time. But he knows being this way doesn't work, not for all parts of his life. And he laments that the guys in his station don't trust him when they are fighting fires. He is not considered for promotion to captain. He turns to his ex-wife for emotional support, but she knows what he's like and she wants a different relationship, so she rejects him. Now, if I were to rattle off that list of Stephen's characteristic traits again, you'd think they were positive. However, when they are the only traits that Stephen has, they are negative. However, Stephen's Shadow or the character traits that he hides are empathy, emotional connection, and humility, and his ability to share his emotions. Now, does Stephen have these characteristics? So are they part of his shadow? Well, I actually ummed and ahed about the answer to this question, and I landed on, by the time I considered it, yes, to some degree. So he shows empathy when Adcox explains why he killed the 3 victims. He reaches out to his wife when he wants emotional connection. But I don't think he's actually ever humble in any way. So why is this? Well, Stephen is a constant character, and he's the secondary protagonist. He's actually the antagonist to Brian for a lot of the movie. But in this movie, he is an example of what happens if a person can't change. Now, I say this because despite asking Brian to give him a second chance, Stephen doesn't change. He dies before he demonstrates any enduring change at all. So Stephen's story is the cautionary one in this movie. Stephen doesn't transition to become a fully integrated person. And in fact, by asking Brian to hide the truth about Adcox, Stephen is asking him to see the world in black and white terms. Now, when characters are presented in black and white terms, or they see the world this way without change, they appear flat, and Stephen is a flat character. Adcox has more complexity than Stephen, and this is demonstrated by the murder method that he uses. The Backdraft is all about targeted killing and reducing the impact of fire, which is a difficult force of nature to control. So here is a man who saved lives regularly, but kills those who he believes are responsible for the deaths of his comrades. This is character dimension, and Valerie covered this in season 8 when we studied cast design. And so it's a really interesting lens to put over these characters in this movie. Now, I do want to pause and reflect on the unsophisticated way the murder victims are presented in this film. It is very stereotypical. They are bad because they made a business deal with the alderman, but they built community centres. Now, I personally don't think that causing the deaths of firefighters as a byproduct of a building contract, the kickbacks they get from those building contracts, I don't think that's justified. But there could have been more of a moral dilemma with the 2 good causes being played off against one another, for the businessmen and for Adcox as well. But now I want to focus on Brian. He is different from his brother, and he is not the opposite of Stephen. Instead, he can read fire and understand it in a way that Stephen doesn't. Now, Stephen fights fire and charges in. That's why he's called Bull. Whereas Brian is wary of fire. And this wariness is interpreted as fear. The root of Brian's caution stems from witnessing his father's death in fire or in a firefight. Brian's object of desire is to be like his father, but he can't until he stops trying to be like Stephen and starts to acknowledge and embrace his shadow, which is his ability to read fire. So Brian embraces his skill in the climactic moment during the fire in the chemical plant. Stephen is mortally wounded with explosions and walls of fire closing in, and Brian listens and watches the fire. He knows how to outsmart it, and he does. This is Brian integrating with his shadow, so the hidden sides of his personality suddenly come into the light. And this is where it is interesting to see how their character development happens in comparison with Stephen. Now, Brian didn't get to this point of integration accidentally. The moment he quits Engine 17 and moves out of Stephen's sphere and into Rimgau's arson investigation, is the moment that he starts to create space for his ability to reveal itself. The point of revelation, again, is overt, and it is when Ronald Bartell, the firebug, brings Brian's hidden gift into the light. And he does this by asking Brian that, did the fire look at him when he saw his father in the firefight? And Brian says yes. So Ronald responds with awe because he knows that that is special. Now, Brian's shadow side is now in the light, but it is not until the climax that he actually uses it. And it's in this scene where Brian has a choice to make. He could have chosen not to listen to the fire and to try and charge his way in the way that Bull would have done it, or Stephen would have done it. But then if he'd done that, it would have been a cautionary tale. But this isn't a cautionary tale, it's a prescriptive tale, because Brian chose to use his hidden ability. So in summary, the shadow is what characters hide or keep locked away, and they aren't always negative character traits. Now, Stephen has a lot of personality on display, and the key to working out his shadow is by looking at his relationship with his wife, and also his inability to lead his men without taking unnecessary risks. His shadow is what his wife and men need from him. He doesn't learn how to integrate his shadow and becomes a cautionary figure in the story. Brian, on the other hand, is more than what he seems. His reticence to embrace his ability to read fire leads him to pursue many careers. He is the butt of many jokes, but when he is mentored by Rimgau, his ability is safe to reveal itself and he shines. All right, Valerie, that's it from me. What's the action step for this week?
All right, it's pretty straightforward. Do you know why your protagonist does what she does? Because you need to know that as the storyteller. And you need to give your main character a monologue where she overtly states this why to the reader, because it's got to be crystal clear.
All right, that wraps it up for this week. Join us again next week when we discuss the substance. Oh God, I don't believe I've done this to us. To support the show, please leave us a rating and review and tell your writer friends about us. And for information about our online training, visit storynerd.ca/courses. To join Valerie's Inner Circle, go to valeriefrancis.ca/inner circle. And for tips about books to help you read like a writer, visit me at melaniehill.au. And remember, story theory doesn't have to be difficult. It's a tool to help you write more, not less. So take it one step at a time and have fun.